Warm greetings and welcome, dear audience. This is Dr. Esther Mala, your firstly and successful global educator, SDG, ESG, STEM, and technology enthusiast from Malaysia. Join our exclusive masterclass on STEAM and featuring latest technology and management skills designed for university students, college-led learners, and working professionals. Led by distinguished academicians and industry experts, this program explores cutting edge innovations in management science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. Gain insights into AI robotics, data AI, robotics, data science, IoT, and more, while understanding their real world application. This masterclass aims to enhance knowledge, foster innovation, and create awareness of the rapidly evolving technological landscape. Stay ahead in your field by equipping yourself with essential skills and future ready expertise. Empower your learning, elevate your career. Dear respected precious audience, esteemed academician, our dedicated project team of Elegant Empire Education welcomes you to our professional masterclass with our favorite, awesome, and brilliant personality, Ambassador Professor Dr. Rania Lampu from Greece today. And her topic, our topic is understanding research series, formulating research questions, and hypothesis part 2. Welcome, dear Dr. Rania.
Greetings from the office, the Greek Ministry of Education, from Athens, from Greece. So thank you so much, Dr. Estera. It is with great pleasure and honor that I welcome you all, me too, to one more session of our research series, brand new program. I would like to thank all the team, Elegant Empire Education, for this great opportunity, and especially you, Dr. Stermala, for giving you this great, great opportunity to share my experiences and my knowledge and my expertise. And today we're going to explore the second part of the session, formulating research questions and hypotheses. So whether you are a student embarking on your first research journey, or a postgraduate refining your thesis, or a professional keen to strengthen your academic writing, I think you are here in the right place. And you know that research, remember something, is at the heart of innovation, academic excellence, but a strong research project doesn't begin with data collection or analysis. It begins with asking the right questions. The ability to formulate a clear, focused, and researchable question is one of the most critical issues that any researcher can develop. So already during the previous session, we have explored how to craft effective research questions that don't only guide our study, but also create a solid foundation for meaningful inquiry. We gave examples. We looked at how these questions naturally lead to the development of hypotheses. Testable hypothesis, we said it's about testable statements that help us investigate patterns, relationships, or effects in a structural and scientific way. So we will continue this journey today. And once again, welcome. I will share now my presentation. So already during the previous session, we have explored how to
Dr.
Estera, there is an echo behind
our study, but also have you uploaded or your screen?
No,
or
yes, now I will share.
Yeah, maybe you can your link for another screen. Okay.
I think it's fine now.
Yeah.
You can see the change of slide.
Yeah, you have to upload, then
okay.
I can.
Okay. So the last chapter of our previous session focused on the hypothesis formulation process. Very briefly, remind that we mentioned what makes a hypothesis testable, how does this relate to the research problem, And this is related with the ability to test a hypothesis, which is a crucial aspect, a very important aspect of the scientific method, because this way we ensure that the hypothesis is grounded in observable, measurable evidence rather than a speculation or subjective interpretation. So what makes a hypothesis testable? Of course, it's about the clear definition of variables, empirical measurement, what we call falsifiability, the ability to be proven false, the specificity of prediction, operationalization of concepts. The concepts in the hypothesis must be operationalized, meaning that they should be translated into measurable, observable terms. So operationalization defines abstract concepts in terms that can be tested, for example, intelligence, for example, motivation, in terms that can be tested, and clarity in direction of relationship is when a hypothesis actually should ideally predict a direction or strength of the relationships between variables, whether positive or negative, or if there is no relationship at all. We mentioned about how hypotheses relate to the research question, a difference between research question and hypothesis. How can hypothesis be framed in a way that aligns with the research question? We need to ensure consistency always, ensure clarity, consider, of course, the type of hypothesis, its null versus its alternative. And the common mistakes, as I mentioned before closing the last time, that the common mistakes in the hypothesis formulation usually stem from some specific situations. For example, when we formulate for a hypothesis that is too broad, or a hypothesis that is too complex, or it involves many variables, or when we have hypothesis without a clear direction, so a non-directional hypothesis. A hypothesis cannot be tested, or when there's a lack of a clear variable relationships, when there is a versionalization, or when we fail to specify the time frame, when we confuse hypotheses and such kind of mistakes. So you need to be very careful about this. The confirmation bias also, it's very important. We need to remain objective in hypothesis formulation. Here you can see this table. What is the mistake? What is the consequence of this mistake? And what is the solution? How we can overcome this mistake? How we can prevent this mistake? We need to clarify the cause-effect relationship, include clear time frames, remain objective always, and formulate directional hypothesis when it's appropriate. So now, the next chapter is related with ethical considerations and is more relevant than ever since we are in the age of artificial intelligence. Everybody is talking about the ethical frameworks that we need to establish in order to prevent the negative effects of the bad use, of the no-wise use of or non-responsible use of AI, especially in research. So what ethical issues must be considered when we formulate research questions and hypotheses? When we formulate questions, particularly in sensitive areas like healthcare or social sciences, several ethical issues must be carefully considered in order to protect participants and ensure integrity in the research process. And this includes respect for persons and informed consent. Research questions should not lead to situations where participants are misled, are coerced, or exposed to risks without fully understanding them. So respect for autonomy here means participants must be informed about the purpose, about the methods, the risks, and benefits of the research. So questions should be framed so that participants can make informed decisions about the involvement. Harm and risk minimization. Some topics may cause psychological or emotional physical distress, trauma, abuse, or terminal illness. Beneficence requires minimizing harm, maximizing benefits. Avoid framing questions that could traumatize participants or uncover sensitive issues without support mechanisms in place. And I mentioned before about informed consent. Of course, there are many cases. For example, if you want to conduct in social science research and draw data or conduct an observation session, an observatory session with drug dealers, I'm giving you this example. Of course, in this situation, we cannot follow informed consent because here we should have keep anonymity. And what is happening is ethical or unethical to be observant among these kind of groups without informing them, because many times research is conducted, for example, among this kind of groups of people, of individuals who don't know that they are a part of a research. So it's ethical or unethical to conduct this essay. So I'm asking this because throughout a research journey, there will be so many ethical dilemmas like this. That's why you should be in contact with your research ethical board, with the research ethics committee, which there are always such committees in the university educational institution, and always have beyond the ethical codes, beyond the ethical regulations, have what I say ethical values. Be guided by your ethical instinct and ethical values beyond ethical conduct and regulations. So this is my proper advice in case you have such problems. Or I will give you another example about ethical use. For example, you want to conduct research in social media and use AI. You're going to use the data from social profiles. Social profiles are publicly displayed, right? I mean, they're everybody can see them. So they're profiles, accounts which are publicly displayed. But is it ethical to use public information? Of course, but it is private. It's about privacy. Okay, it's publicly displayed, but it's about private information. So again, there is an issue of ethical dilemma. So it is ethical or unethical to conduct. How to conduct this? How to allow AI tools to draw data from social media profiles while these people don't know about this kind of issues. So we talk about so many issues now about privacy, confidentiality, especially if we talk about sensitive topics which may involve private information like health status or illegal behaviors. I mentioned before the case of drug dealers or drug users. These problems usually occur in social science research. But in medicine also, or medical research, what would be the same, researchers must protect the confidentiality of participant data, and hypotheses and questions should be formulated in ways that avoid unnecessary intrusion into private lives. Research should not unfairly target or exclude particular groups. So we need to involve a fair distribution of research benefits and burdens, avoid cost questions that exploit vulnerable populations or reinforce stereotypes and biases. And definitely, if we consider cultural sensitivity, this means that questions should respect cultural differences and values, because sometimes questions may inadvertently be culturally insensitive or ethnocentric. So ensure that questions are appropriate across the diverse groups and contexts. What we call scientific integrity. Questions and hypotheses must be grounded in sound science. Sound science means not shaped by bias, by funding sources, or personal beliefs. Honesty and transparency in research design, this is very important, and avoid formulating leading questions or hypotheses that reflect desired outcomes rather than genuine inquiry. The vulnerability of populations, because groups like children, or the elderly, or prisoners, or individuals with cognitive impairments require additional safeguards. Extra protections must be in place for those with limited autonomy. And what is the implication? It's a tailored research questions in order to ensure that they don't exploit these populations. This should be the advice. Research-minded also could be misinterpreted or used to justify discrimination, especially in areas like genetics, mental health, or social behavior. So the ethical principle here is to anticipate and mitigate the misuse of knowledge. So try to frame questions in ways that clarify context and limitations of the research. And when, in general, we formulate research questions in sensitive areas, ethical diligence is critical. So researchers must strive to uphold the scientific integrity, anticipate social impact, ensure justice, protect confidentiality, and as I mentioned before, ethical review boards often provide oversight, but the responsibility begins with the researcher's own conscientious planning. Now, how can a researcher ensure that the research question hypothesis do not introduce bias? Okay, this is simple. You need to formulate neutral and objective research questions. You need to avoid value-laden assumptions. So, base hypothesis on evidence and theory. Frame null and alternative hypothesis clearly. This helps avoid favoring one side. Conduct a literature review without cherry picking. What does this mean? This means use a comprehensive and balanced review of the literature to inform the question. The peer review also is important. The pilot testing, test the clarity and neutrality of the question in a small pilot study of focus group and use of clear operational definitions. How does participant consent factor into the way research questions are formulated? Participant consent is a foundational ethical principle in what we call human-centric research. And this significantly influences how research questions are formulated. For example, researchers must design questions that participants can ethically and comfortably consent to answer. And this entails how they frame research questions in a way that respects autonomy, privacy, and dignity of participants, ensuring that participants fully understand the nature of what they're consenting to through clear and transparent consent forms. Avoid overly invasive or distressing questions unless absolutely necessary and justified. And ensure voluntariness and autonomy. Consent underpins the voluntary nature of participation. Research questions must not imply coercion or manipulation and be phrased in ways that could mislead participants about the study's purpose or outcomes. And research questions must be refined in order to fit within what participants are willing and able to consent to. Avoid populations that cannot provide informed consent, for example, minors or individuals with cognitive impairments, unless special ethical protocols are in place. This is very important about especially groups with special education needs. You need to be very, very careful. We need special ethical protocols, and also, if we talk about minors, we need the consent of parents, always parental consentment. Institutional review boards assess whether research questions align with what participants are told and consented to. So this affects, of course, the clarity and transparency of questions on whether sensitive topics are addressed appropriately. And consent considerations may require adjusting research questions to account for cultural norms or stigmas, ensuring that participants are not placed at risk or made uncomfortable. Therefore, participant consent doesn't just come after the research is designed. It actively shapes what can be asked, how it can be, it's asked, and to whom. Ethical research starts with aligning questions to the principles of informed, voluntary, and respectful participation. So here is a summarization of this chapter. Would focus on how ethical considerations will lead to more responsible and biased research outcomes, ensuring that research questions are neutral and do not reduce bias, and ethical frameworks, including participant consent, are those ingredients that will guide the development of research question and hypothesis, respecting always participant rights. Now, about testing, evaluating hypothesis. How can you test the validity of a hypothesis once it is formulated? testing the validity involves a structured and empirical approach to define whether there is sufficient evidence to support or refute it. So here is the step-by-step overview of how to test a hypothesis and how to ensure its validity. First, for example, increased physical activity reduces symptoms of depression in adolescents. Here we formulate the null hypothesis, where is the no relationship, an alternative hypothesis where there is a relationship or effect. You choose an appropriate research design. That could be quantitative, that could be qualitative, or mixed method, experimental, non-experimental, thematic analysis, case studies, what it will be. Choose an appropriate research design, select or develop measurement tools, use reliable and validated instruments to ensure what you are measuring, reflects the hypothesis. And the measurement should be, of course, reliable. What is mean reliability? Consistently give the same results. And what means validity? But we measure what they're supposed to measure. Reliable and valid measurements. Collect data systematically, ensure that data collection is ethically conducted and free from bias. Try to analyze the data statistically, so describe statistics, and we could talk about inferential statistics. If we need to test a hypothesis using tools like t-test, ANOVA, regression analysis, t-squared test for categorical variables, p-values, and confidence intervals to assess significance. We'll discuss about all these things when we'll explore data analysis and data collection, and we will have also the chance to explore more about inferential statistics and present also the SPSS software, statistical software, and many more things. So this is just an idea of what we will explore next weeks. We need to evaluate internal external validity. What is internal validity? Internal validity is related with these questions. Are changes in the dependent variable due to the dependent variable, not other factors? And what is the external validity? Can the findings be generalized to other populations or other settings? Consider application and peer review. Repeat the study to different samples, and peer review submit findings to academic or scientific scrutiny for feedback. Interpret results in context. So here, if the data support the hypothesis, you may accept an alternative hypothesis. If not, you fail to reject the null hypothesis, but don't prove it. So you always you need to consider the effect size, the practical significance, and limitations of your study. So the summary could be the testing the validity of hypothesis involves clear formulation, accurate data collection, rigorous statistical analysis, critical evaluation of results, and of course, careful research design. A valid hypothesis is one that is tested rigorously, withstands replication. It should involve replicability and contributes meaningfully to knowledge. Now, what statistical tools are used to evaluate hypotheses, and how do these relate to the research question? For descriptive statistics, I'm giving some idea. Here we have for tools the mean, median, mode, standard deviation, range, frequency distributions, and what is the relation to the research question. These tools are used to understand general trends before testing hypotheses, especially useful for exploratory questions or establishing a baseline. For inferential statistics, these tools help draw conclusions about populations based on a sample data. They are central to hypothesis testing. So here, for example, t-tests. They are used for comparing means between two groups. I'll give you an example. Does a new teaching method improve test scores compared to the traditional method? Here, you can see what is the related hypothesis. The null hypothesis, no difference, and the alternative, there is a difference. So T-test, ANOVA analysis of variance. It is used for comparing means across 3 or more groups. For example, do different diets affect weight loss differently? So the hypothesis structure here is similar to t-tests, but with multiple group comparisons. This is the difference with the t-test. T-square is used for testing relationships between categorical variables. For categorical variables, so we can give an example. Is there any association between gender voting preference? For correlation regression, these tools are used to measure and model relationships between variables. We evaluate here, we consider correlation, Pearson's R, strength and direction of a linear relationship, the regression predicting a dependent variable from one or more independent variables. How well can study time predict exam scores? This is an example of correlation or regression, how we can measure relationships between variables. And no parametric tests. Here they are used when data don't meet assumptions. Examples: Mann-Whitney, Kruskal-Wallis, Wilson signed rank test. And they are useful when we deal with ordinary data or small sample sizes. Competence intervals or p-values. Competence intervals indicate the range within a population parameter lies with a certain probability, and p-values help determine statistical significance, typically compared to a 0.05. Don't worry, we'll explain everything about this and give you just a simple idea, but we will talk extensively about differential statistics in another session. We'll explain everything about p-values and hypotheses. So how do these relate to the research question? The type of question, that could be comparison or association or prediction, dictates the type of hypothesis, which in turn determines the appropriate statistical test. Statistical tools provide evidence to accept or reject the hypothesis, thereby addressing the research question in a rigorous and quantifiable way. How do you know if your hypothesis is too broad or too specific for proper testing? Some characteristics of a well-formulated hypothesis is that it needs to be testable, so can be measured or observed through empirical data, falsifiable, can be proven false for evidence, specific enough to guide research design, and broad enough to allow generalization. Now, how we can identify if our hypothesis is too broad? What are the signs? If it includes too many variables or concepts, if it tries to explain complex phenomena in one statement, if it cannot be tested in a single study due to the scope of feasibility. I'll give you an example. An example of a hypothesis which is too broad. Social media affects mental health, academic performance, and social relationships in teenagers. This is too broad. This could be split into multiple focused hypotheses. So we can fix it. How? We can narrow down this phrase into variable outcome at a time, one variable outcome at a time. For example, increased time on social media is associated with high levels of anxiety in teenagers. So we have fixed this way, a broad hypothesis. How to identify if your hypothesis is too specific? If you over-narrow the population conditions or measurement, if we have results that are not generalizable, if it is difficult to interpret meaningful results beyond the immediate study. I'll give you an example. Using the TikTok for exactly 2 hours daily between 6 and 8 p.m. leads to a 5% decrease in self-reported happiness among 60-year-old female students in urban public schools. So it is very hard to test appropriate or apply findings to other groups. How we can fix this? We can widen the scope slightly while retaining clarity and say greater use of TikTok is associated with lower self-reported happiness among teenage girls. And what are the tips to strike the right balance? Focus on independent and one dependent variable. Frame it around the clear and observable relationships that could be cause-effect correlation. Check the feasibility. If this can be tested with time data and the resources, and ask yourself, can I collect data? Would the results be meaningful? Would I explain this to someone unfamiliar with the topic? So valid testing will directly evaluate the relationship or effect predicted by the research question. Statistical tools like regression analysis or chi-square test will help test the validity of a hypothesis based on the research design. And the hypothesis that is either too broad or too specific may lead to unreliable or untestable results. Now, of the role of feedback also very, very important because this offers clarification and enhances relevance, addresses potential bias, strengthens the theoretical foundation, and ethical considerations, of course, I mentioned before, always when we refine research questions and hypotheses. What should researchers adapt, how they should adapt the questions if preliminary data contradicts initial expectations? This entails this involves first to analyze the data carefully. This is the first step. The second step is to try to first we check for errors here. So before revisiting the hypothesis, we need to ensure the data is accurate. We look for sampling errors or data entry mistakes or biases that may have affected the results. We try to assess the quality of the data. We try to revisit the initial assumptions, identify why our hypothesis was formed. We try to check the theoretical grounding. Was our hypothesis derived from an established theory? If the data contradict expectations, it might suggest that your theoretical framework needs adjustment. We need to reframe the question to be more open-ended. If the data doesn't align with our initial question, then we consider revising it to focus on understanding the complexity of the findings rather than confirming an initial belief. For example, if your hypothesis was increasing screen time reduces academic performance, but the data shows no relationship, then you should reframe the question to explore what factors are influencing academic performance. So here we need to adapt the research question to exploring emerging patterns from the data. What factors influence academic performance in students with high screen time? Then we need to sometimes to revise the hypothesis based on data. If the preliminary data suggests something unexpected, then we can adapt the hypothesis to test a new relationship. And then we can use what we call exploratory data analysis by conducting exploratory analysis techniques in order to uncover patterns that were not initially hypothesized, and this can lead to new insights or hypotheses, so identifying new variables or relationships also, because sometimes contradictory data might uncover hidden relationships or factors which were not previously considered. And in this case, we can use, for example, statistical techniques like correlation analysis or regression or even clustering to explore new patterns in the data. Consider a more iterative or hypothesis generative approach. So this means shift from confirmatory to exploratory research. If the data contradicts your hypothesis, then it may be time to switch to an exploratory approach that generates new hypotheses. In this case, you are no longer testing a preconceived idea, but discovering new avenues for research. So the action here is to formulate new hypotheses based on the exploratory findings and test them in a more, we could say, refined follow-up study. Be transparent A report changes clearly because document changes to your hypothesis and questions. I mean, in your research report, we need to make sure to explicitly note how and why you change the research direction. This shows scientific rigor and maintains the credibility of the research. What we call post hoc hypothesis generation. If hypotheses are developed after viewing data, for example, rather than being pre-specified, then label them as exploratory or post hoc to maintain transparency. So here, the action should be to clearly state the reasoning behind adapting the hypothesis and research questions in your research report, especially if you are making significant shifts. Example of adapting a hypothesis. The initial hypothesis. Increasing social media use it decreases academic performance among teenagers. This is our initial hypothesis. Contradictory preliminary data. When there is no significant correlation between social media and academic performance, but there is a negative correlation between social media use and sleep quality, which in turn affects academic performance. So here you can revise your research question like this. How does social media use influence academic performance through sleep quality? And now we write our new hypothesis after this change, and we say increased social media use negatively affects sleep quality, which in turn negatively impacts academic performance. What are the steps that I have already mentioned is to verify the data quality and ensure no errors, to revisit initial assumptions, theoretical grounding, try to reframe the research question to reflect always new data, adapt or revise the hypothesis to fit emerging patterns, conduct exploratory data analysis, be transparent about changes in hypothesis, and try to always search for, be clear in research reports and publication. So now, if we talk about the practical application of research, how does the formulation of research questions and hypotheses vary across different fields? The formulation of research, this varies significantly across different fields. I mentioned some cases about social sciences before, healthcare or technology. Why? Because of the differences in subject matter, differences in methodology, differences in ethical considerations and the goals of the research. So how this happens? For example, social sciences, the nature of inquiry here is human behavior. The research question should be how? Should be often open-ended, exploratory, qualitative. We try to understand the how and why something happens. For example, how does socioeconomic status influence educational attainment? How could be this hypothesis? A hypothesis used in quantitative data, in quantitative studies, often involve associational or causal relationships, like higher parental education leads to improved academic performance in children. So what are the considerations here? Cultural sensitivity, subjectivity, and potential researcher bias. Use of mixed methods is common to capture complexity. Flexibility and context, of course, are the key. Questions evolve with understanding of social dynamic. In healthcare, the same thing, we search about the nature of inquiry. Here we have diagnosis, we have treatment efficacy, patient outcomes. So here the research questions should be usually specific, measurable, outcome-oriented. The hypothesis should be often cause-effect based. And the consideration should include high ethical standards. Precision and patient safety, of course, drive hypothesis formulation. For the technology and engineering, here, the nature of inquiry is innovation, so here the research questions often involve problem-solving or innovation-focused hypotheses. And typically here we ask what works best, how can we improve, it is feasible. And the hypothesis here focus on performance comparisons, feasibility, or design improvements. So here, functionality, efficiency, and innovation shape question hypothesis design. here you can see some differences from the aspect of focus or question style, hypothesis type, between these three fields. What are the methods used? Social science, mixed methods, surveys, interviews. For healthcare, clinical trials. For technology, prototyping, simulations, A/B testing. Remember these types, question styles that I mentioned before: open-ended, specific for healthcare, technology, problem solving, and for hypothesis, social sciences, associational, clearly causal for healthcare, and comparative optimization driven for technology. Of course, while all fields aim to generate knowledge, the way they formulate research questions and hypotheses, this depends. This actually reflects, we could say, the unique goals, the challenges, and epistemologies. So a strong researcher tailors these elements to fit disciplinary standards and expectations of their field. And what are the best practices for writing clear, precise, and focused research questions? The best practices is to always be specific and focused, avoid vague or overly broad questions, define the scope clearly: who, what, where, and how. Align, you won't ask what affects success, student success, but you can ask how does daily study time influence GPA among first-year university students in the USA. Try to align with the research objective, use clear and simple language, try to ensure measurability. For example, is happiness important for students? This is wrong. You need to avoid these abstract or untestable ideas. Instead of this, you can say, what is the relationship between self-reported happiness score and academic performance in college students? What are the best practices for hypothesis is to make it testable. Good hypothesis must be falsifiable based on measurable variables to state the direction. Use directional hypothesis when existing theory or prior research suggests a specific outcome, and use non-directional hypothesis when exploring without assuming direction. Example of directional hypothesis: increased physical activity leads to improved memory recall. Non-directional, there is a relationship between physical activity and memory recall. Then you try to align with the research question. Here, your hypothesis should be a logical extension always of your research question, because it provides a tentative answer or prediction based on theory or prior findings, and use the if, then, or there is a relationship, etc. formats. These formats help actually ensure clarity and focus. For example, if high school students receive mindfulness training, then the stress levels will decrease. Keep it concise. This means avoid multiple predictions in one hypothesis. If you have multiple variables or outcomes, break them into separate hypotheses. So the final tip here could be that you need to test your question or hypothesis with peers or mentors for clarity and relevance, to be open to refining them as your literature review or pilot studies progress. And here you can see again another table about the principles of clarity, specificity. For research question, the research question defines a precise issue, hypothesis, states, and exam testable claim. Research question matches study objective, hypothesis derives logically for the research question. The research question focuses on observable phenomena. Hypothesis involves measurable variables. Research question avoids unnecessary complexity. Hypothesis focuses on one main prediction. And what about relevance? This addresses a meaningful gap or a problem. On the other hand, we have hypothesis is tied always to theory or prior research. Researchers can, of course, how can researchers balance the complexity of the research question with the need of clarity? Remember this, what I said, I have said this many times. So we need to start broad, but then narrow down. Complex topics often start with a broad interest area. How we use actually literature reviews and expert feedback to identify specific gap or angle. And then our goal here is to distill complexity into a focused, manageable question that targets one aspect at a time. For example, how does climate change affect human health? This is the start. How does climate change impact human health? How this is refined? What is the impact of rising temperatures or respiratory illness rates in urban populations? Try to break complexity into sub-questions. Why? Because complex phenomena can overwhelm a single research question. How you can do this? You can divide your topic into smaller related questions that collectively address a larger issue. What is the goal here is to maintain depth without sacrificing clarity. For example, instead of asking, how does socioeconomic status affect education outcomes? You can break this into saying that how does parental income relate to high school graduation rates? What role does access to educational resources play in academic achievement? Then focus on feasibility. Why? Because a highly complex question may be theoretically interesting but practically unworkable. So how we can do this? By considering available time, resources, data, access, and expertise. So our goal here is to align ambition with what we can realistically be accomplished in our time frame and context. The tip here is to use a pilot study of feasibility assessment to test the practicality of your approach. Use always clear operational definitions. Why? Because complexity can lead to ambiguity. Define always key terms and variables precisely so that can be measured and understood. Why is the goal here is to preserve the sophistication of the question while making it comprehensible and researchable. Try to prioritize one core relationship or effect. Why? Because trying to study too many variables or interactions at once, this can muddy the focus. So try keep the research tight and the research interpretable, and how? By choosing the most central relationship or effect that your study will investigate. Instead of saying how do teaching style, class size, and curriculum affect the student performance and motivation, instead of saying this, you can try saying how does teaching style affect the student motivation in high school math classes. Then reframe into with smart criteria. Sorry. Reframe with smart criteria. Make sure that your question is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, bound, and seek also feedback early. Seek feedback early. Why? Because others can spot unclear wording, unnecessary complexity, or practical goals. So we can ask, for example, supervisors or peers or experts to review a question, and the goal here is to strike a balance between academic rigor and clarity. So remember these things that the formulation of research questions, a hypothesis, will differ across fields and must be always be clear, focused, and relevant to the study's objective. That best practices for writing a research question hypothesis include using precise language and ensuring alignment with the research goals. And balancing complexity and clarity in research questions hypothesis ensures always feasibility and clarity in study expression, etc. So here you can see in one table, we can see here what is the challenge and what is the solution. Here, for example, if we have a too broad or vague hypothesis, then, as mentioned before, we need to narrow down our hypothesis. If it's too complex to test, then we can break it into sub-questions or stages. If we have ambiguous or unclear hypothesis, then we need to define terms and use precise language. If it's unrealistic for timeline, then we have to scale down scope and test feasibility. And if it's hard to interpret, then we have to focus on one core relationship or hypothesis. And now, another question that you may have is, how do the research question hypotheses evolve throughout the research process? Remember that the question hypotheses are not static. They evolve throughout the research process as understanding deepens and as new insights emerge. This evolution ensures that the study remains relevant, focused, and grounded in evidence. So how this usually evolves, we have the initial conception, the stage, idea generation based on our personal interests, social need, literature gaps, etc. Then we have the research question, which is broad and exploratory. And what about the hypothesis may not yet exist or it's too general? The goal for the initial question, conception is to identify a topic and begin narrowing focus. Then it's the literature review. At this stage, we review existing research to understand current knowledge, theories, and methods. So the research question here becomes more specific and refined based on existing findings or gaps. And the hypothesis begins now to take shape as a testable directional statement. So the goal here is to ensure that questions and hypotheses are relevant, original, researchable. And the next step is the research design, methodology planning, decide how to collect, analyze data, how to adjust with what can be realistically studied using available tools and participants, and hypothesis here it should be refined for clarity, testability, and operationalization of variables. So the goal here is to ensure that questions and hypotheses are relevant, original, researchable. The next step is the research design methodology, the data collection, gathering data through experiments, through surveys, through interviews. The research question may shift slightly if unexpected patterns or limitations arise. For example, lack of participation or participant diversity, And for hypothesis, at this stage, hypothesis remains stable, but additional hypotheses may emerge based on early observations. So here, the goal is to stay flexible, but maintain methodological integrity. For data analysis, at this stage, we interpret the data, then the research question is, this can lead to new questions based on surprising or unclear results, and the hypothesis is tested. The data analysis hypothesis is tested depending on the outcome. It may be rejected, supported, or modified for future research. So here the goal is to draw evidence-based conclusions, understand implications. The next stage is the next step is interpretation and discussion. Here we try to relate our findings to the original question in a broader context, and this often leads to new sub-questions or follow-up research questions, and the validity of our hypothesis is discussed in light of findings, limitations, and potential biases. Our goal here is to place findings in context and build a foundation for future work. About the publication peer feedback, we start to share finally our research with the academic community. Our research questions may be reinterpreted or challenged by peer reviewers or future researchers. And our goal here is to refine understanding and contribute to cumulative scientific knowledge. So have in mind these things that for all these steps, the initial idea, the research question is broad exploratory, hypothesis may be absent or vague, the literature review, then the next step, our research question is refined based on existing gaps, but the hypothesis developed and linked to theory. For design and methods, here the research question is sharpened to fit methodology, but the hypothesis here is made measurable and testable. For data collection, the research question is adjusted for practicality and may lead to new or related hypotheses. For analysis and interpretation, the research question leads to deeper new questions, but the hypothesis is accepted, rejected, or revised. And for the publication, here the research question is open to critique and refinement, and the hypothesis may inform or be tested by future studies. So both of the research question and hypothesis evolve iteratively, we could say, from vague ideas to specific testable components guided by theory and reflection throughout the research journey. And I mentioned before about the crucial role of feedback from mentors, for peers, or subject experts. This helps identify whether the research question is too broad or too vague or poorly formulated. And refining the question always helps make the research more targeted, more manageable, ensuring that it can be answered within the scope of the study. And the feedback helps, of course, evaluate whether the research question and hypothesis are relevant to the current scientific discourse or practical needs. For example, feedback may indicate that the study on social media and mental health should also consider cultural differences, making the question more globally relevant. So feedback from stakeholders or literature reviews ensures that the research addresses meaningful gaps in knowledge or has real-world applications, increasing the significance of the study. And the input from supervisors or peers always helps identify potential limitations in resources, of course, time or access to participants. So researchers may need to refine their questions or hypotheses to align with what is practically possible, leading to a more feasible and focused study design. If it is difficult to access a large enough sample size for a broad question, then feedback may encourage narrowing the scope of the study to a smaller but more manageable group. All these issues show that actually feedback plays a central role in shaping the clarity, the relevance, visibility, and rigor of research questions and the hypotheses, because this way we can strengthen the theoretical foundation. Feedback for experts ensures that the research questions are well grounded in existing theories. We can address potential biases and the assumptions, and of course, we ensure that the hypothesis is logically consistent with the research question that is testable using appropriate methods. So thank you very much for your attention. Before concluding here, we can see that balancing complexity and clarity in research questions, hypothesis always ensures visibility and clarity in study execution, and the best practices include always using precise language and ensuring alignment with the research goal. Thank you very much for your attention, and for any question, you can write on the chat book and
Yes, yes. Very, very interesting session also today. And I think I would like to, it is very detailed here. It's very detailed, very well articulated and all. But the thing is that I have this question from the earlier part. Actually, a lot of questions, but I think we don't have time for that. But I just need some clarification so that we have students and lecturers watching this also, right? So in the area of this question is related to ethical issues. Ethical issues. Maybe you want to go back, but I think this is the point I will give you at the beginning. Ethical points. Yeah.
Yes,
So,
this is my favorite.
Yeah, ethical issues when formulating research questions and hypotheses. So just I'm curious about the number 3, harm and risk. Can you give example? What kind of harm if you're not careful in formulating the research questions and hypotheses? What are the potential harm and risk? Maybe you can give example if you know.
Yes, ethical issues in research are related with welfare, what we call welfare and risk. And this actually ensures that participants are treated fairly, safely, and with respect.
The subject involved.
Yes.
Subject
For example,
involved,
participant welfare, this includes the psychological, the emotional well-being, the informed consent. I mentioned before, the informed consent. Participants must be fully informed about the study, including the potential risks, before
and
agreeing
also
to
their personal
participate.
data.
They
and
need
also
to know,
their personal data.
apart from this, first they need to know how risky is the research. For example, Elon Musk, has implanted a chip in the Neuralink company, his Neuralink company.
Yes.
He has implanted the chips in the brain of some disabled individuals in order to help them play with video games, etc. This was a successful surgery. I mean, after this surgery, individuals indeed they can play games. But they need to. These individuals should give the consent. They know the risks, but because if this doesn't work, what will happen? This is what I mean about risk. They need to
No,
know the potential risk. And they
risk.
should have also the opportunity to withdraw at any time without penalty. They have the right to
Yeah,
withdraw.
the person who's doing the person who's doing the research must be very careful in documenting the contract or consent signed by the subject. Yeah, like what you say. If it's
Especially,
successful, okay. If
Mhm.
it's not successful, what are the consequences, or is the subject willing to bear
It's
it?
not only about this, about vulnerable groups, with minors, with children, with people with disabilities. We need special ethical protocols there. If we
Yeah.
conduct about with prisoners, I mentioned
Mm.
about anonymity with drug users, with drug dealers. We can't use the data.
Yeah. Yeah.
So personal data must be kept secure. They're anonymous where it's possible. It's not easy, and because they're with prisoners, they don't give their consent. Obviously, the drug dealer will never give the consent about your research. So what will you do? How will
In
you
case.
conduct the research or a drug user? It's not easy.
Yeah.
There are many ethical dilemmas about this.
Yeah. So the researchers got to be very careful, and because otherwise it backfires them, right? Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you, dear. And then number 4. How about the privacy and confidential? Just give examples so easy for maybe their personal
Yes.
data. Is it private and confidential?
Yes, I mentioned during my presentation that if, for example, we wanted to conduct research on social media, and I want your opinion about this, Dr. Estera. I want your opinion. You want to conduct a research using AI tools and
Yeah.
draw information from social media profiles,
Mm, I do.
which are publicly displayed, but it's
Ah,
about private information.
yeah.
I
That's
mean,
not right.
whether they go, for example, to cafeteria, but why it's not right? Because they're publicly displayed. I mean, these people have decided to post publicly what they're doing. Is it ethical
Yeah.
or unethical to draw this data using AI tools? Here is the point. We talk about AI and privacy, the confidentiality. What should happen here? It's ethical or
But
unethical?
again, yeah. And again, how sure are we the data they posted on the FB is the correct data, right?
Again, this is another issue. This is about
There's a lot of cameras,
inaccuracy. Inaccuracy. There's an issue of inaccuracy of data.
inaccuracy,
This is another issue. But we can't know about this.
inaccuracy, fake, fake.
Fake,
When it come to
pseudonyme,
privacy and confidential, scammers can be
pseudonymous.
there.
Mhm,
Yeah,
mhm.
I've come across scammers. I've this is a
Yes.
high profile scammers. That was the first experience. I got a shock. Then I thought to myself, I thought it is a dentist, dentist. So I thought it's okay. Then later I found out, oh, if I'm not careful, if I'm careless, if I'm easily seduced, I would have been
Mm,
finished. But because we have principles in life, right?
yes.
Anything which is not right, we don't want to do, right? So that protect us, you see. They say a lot of people don't know. People think whatever we do, nobody knows. Yes, nobody knows. When we don't have principles in life, I will not do what is not right. Okay, I will do
Yes.
only what is right. Then there will come a point where, because of your habit and attitude, you'll be succumb to this kind of scams. Yeah, because like on social media, there's no privacy and confidential.
Yes.
Some
And
some got
another
sucked
issue
into it,
mhm. I
some
want to
managed
focus
to
on.
escape. Yeah, please.
Yes, I want to mention here about the data of students, and there are many issues nowadays with the leak of data. This happened in Greece, in my country. There was a scandal, the leak of
Mm,
student data. Schools must be very careful to do not over collect data, only what is absolutely necessary, use encrypted devices and all these things. So I could say that the main, we have teenagers now who are watching us, the main examples of privacy issue is when we publish identifiable data, because this is, it's unethical because it violates confidentiality, it can cause stigma, can cause embarrassment. If
yeah.
we publish a detailed personal story, another case is when we have inadequate data storage, when the personal data is stored on an unencrypted device, or if it's shared on unsecured networks. This increases the risk of data breaches. When we
That's
use
right.
data without consent, researchers use
Without
data
consent,
collected
yes.
for one study. Research can sometimes use data collected for one study in a new study without informing participants. How many
Yeah.
times this has happened? So breaches informed consent. This breach because participants didn't agree to the new use of the data. You understand? They agreed in the first step, but didn't agree in the new one. When we record without permission, we have audio, video, what are recording during interviews without informing the participants.
So the
The other
researchers got to be very responsible over
Yes,
the subject. Yeah, over the subject.
yes, yes. Again, what I said in my presentation, there are, of course, ethical regulations. They need to be in contact with the ethical boards, ethical committees, the regulations, the guidelines from the papers, journals, etc. But beyond this, there are always ethical values, the moral, your own personal values that you need to follow. Beyond ethical code, ethical conduct. This is my
Mm,
opinion as researchers in order
yes.
to maintain their academic integrity.
One, yes. One last one is because why I ask these questions is I want our audience to know that these are very important points to note when we are doing research. Besides the rest, yeah, all you have stipulated just now is all important, but these are two main areas where we got to be very careful because our topic, our subject will be affected. And because they are affected, we are also affected at the end of the day. Okay. Yeah. And with the law and pursuit. Okay. The one last question about scientific integration,
Scientific
ethical issue related. Yeah. Ethical
integrity,
issues,
integrity. You say
integrity. No, scientific integrity, is it?
integrity. You mentioned
Integrity or integration?
scientific integration. What do you want us to say by this?
Because this is one of the points. So is there anything you want to give example to explain? If nothing, it's okay.
Scientific integrity. Okay, this if it's about the commitment to honesty, to transparency, to accountability. These principles of all the ethical frameworks. When we conduct and report research, for example, when we need to be honest when we report data, results, or methods and procedures. We need to be transparent. What means transparency? Disclose all relevant information, including conflicts of interest that could be, or funding sources. It's another big issue that we can discuss. What
Yeah.
is accountability? Take responsibility of your work, including errors and misconduct, the objectivity. Avoid personal bias in your design, in your analysis or interpretation of results. Another issue you need to remember is what we call proper attribution. Give credit. Give credit to others when it's you. That could be through citation or acknowledgement. And you know that a plagiarism is penalized. Hmm?
Mm. Yeah.
So do not plagiarize or misuse copyright materials, respect for intellectual property, and avoid all these violations of scientific integrity, which include the plagiarism, falsification, manipulating. When we alter results, when we manipulate research process or data, this is very, very also serious falsification. When we
Yes.
fabricate, when we make up data or results, this
Yes. Yeah.
misleads the scientific community.
I don't know
When
how they're going to use makeup data. It's very, I don't know how people are using
do
makeup
you
data.
know one term, Dr.
It won't
Esther,
be
which is,
accurate.
do you know one term, ghostwriting? Have you heard the term ghostwriting?
Ghostwriting. Yes, good. Right.
When
Yeah, yeah.
someone writes a paper but is not listed as an author. So here we mislead about who is responsible for the work.
Uh-huh. You see, a lot of ghostwriters nowadays, right?
Yeah,
They're
I
part
know.
timers and all. So
Yes.
a lot of companies using,
Yes, companies,
ghostwriters to write books.
when you don't reveal your financial interest, if your company funds your research, if a company funds your research and you not reveal the conflicts of interest, This creates biases. This compromises subjectivity.
Yeah.
Or if you
Exactly.
duplicate publication, when you publish the same result, for example, in multiple journals, all these things are serious issues of scientific integrity.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. Thank you so much for this wonderful session together. And we are looking forward to your next session again next week. Thank you so much, Ambassador Professor Dr. Rania Lampu. You are doing a great job. Okay, and dear audience, thank you for your time and support, and thank you for always being with us. We'll meet again with another interesting research topic under understanding research next Thursday. So stay tuned, fix your calendar every Thursday to be with us, and of course every Wednesday we have Sustainable Development Goal Forum. This we are not able to have it yesterday because we have some unexpected situation. Our panelist is not able to attend because of Wi-Fi connection. So we'll meet you again next week with a very interesting panelist. And thank you so much again. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone again. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you very much.